Our story begins in the ancient kingdom of Persia, ruled by the powerful King Xerxes. The Persian Empire stretched far and wide, encompassing lands and people of diverse cultures and beliefs. Among these people were the Jews, who had been taken into exile generations earlier. They lived scattered throughout the empire, far from their homeland, yet they remained steadfast in their faith. In the capital city of Susa, King Xerxes decided to display his power and wealth by hosting a grand banquet. This was not just any feast, it was a celebration that lasted a full 180 days. The nobility, officials, and dignitaries from every province were invited to witness the splendor of the empire. The king's vast wealth was on display. The finest linens, the most precious silver and gold, and a dazzling array of food and drink. King Xerxes wanted the world to see the extent of his glory and the prosperity of his reign. As the month-long banquet drew to a close, King Xerxes hosted an additional 7-day feast for the people of Susa, from the wealthiest to the poorest. Wine flowed freely, and the palace was decorated with the finest purple and blue fabrics, hung on marble pillars with cords of linen and purple. On the final day of the feast, the king, now in high spirits from the wine, commanded that his queen Vashti come before him. Vashti was beautiful, and Xerxes wanted to display her beauty to his guests. But Queen Vashti refused to come, defying the king's order. Her refusal was unprecedented, and it shocked the court. The king was enraged, and his advisors quickly warned him of the consequences of Vashti's defiance. They suggested that her actions could inspire women throughout the empire to disobey their husbands. To prevent this, they advised the king to depose Vashti and issue a decree that she would never again appear before him. This decree would set an example and ensure that women across the empire respected their husbands. Xerxes agreed, and Vashti was removed as queen. To find a new queen, the king's advisors proposed a search throughout the empire for the most beautiful young women. These women would be brought to the king's harem, where they would undergo a year of beauty treatments before being presented to him. Among those chosen was a young Jewish woman named Esther, also known by her Hebrew name, Hadassah. Esther was an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, who was a devout Jew and a man of wisdom. Before Esther was taken to the palace, Mordecai advised her to keep her Jewish identity a secret, as they lived in a land where their people were often looked upon with suspicion. In the harem, Esther was placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch who oversaw the women. She quickly won his favor, and he provided her with special treatments, the best food, and 7 handmaidens from the palace. Over the course of a year, the women in the harem were prepared to meet the king, receiving beauty treatments and learning court etiquette. When it was Esther's turn, she took only what Hegai recommended, and her humility and grace made her stand out. When Esther finally appeared before King Xerxes, he was captivated by her beauty and charm. She won his favor above all the other women, and he placed the royal crown on her head, making her queen in place of Vashti. Yet Esther kept her heritage and family background hidden, just as Mordecai had advised. Meanwhile, Mordecai continued to live near the king's gate, keeping a watchful eye on Esther's welfare. One day, while he was at the gate, he overheard a plot to assassinate King Xerxes. 2 of the king's officers, Bigthana and Teresh, were conspiring to kill him. Mordecai quickly reported the plot to Esther, who then informed the king, giving credit to Mordecai. The plot was investigated, and when it was confirmed, the conspirators were executed. This act of loyalty was recorded in the royal chronicles. But Mordecai received no reward. At the same time, a man named Haman, an Agagite, and a descendant of the ancient enemies of the Jews, rose to a position of great power. King Xerxes elevated Haman to the highest position in the court, second only to the king himself. Haman was a proud and ambitious man, and he commanded that all the royal officials bow down to him. However, Mordecai, a devout Jew, refused to bow or pay homage to Haman. His refusal stemmed from his faith, as he would bow only to God. Haman was furious and, upon learning that Mordecai was Jewish, decided not only to punish him, but to eliminate all Jews throughout the empire. To determine the most favorable day to carry out his plan, Haman cast lots, called Pur, which means lot in Hebrew. The lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Haman went to King Xerxes and slandered the Jewish people, saying, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury." The king, trusting Haman's judgment, handed over his signet ring, giving Haman the authority to issue an irreversible decree. Letters were sent by couriers to all the provinces, instructing the people to kill all the Jews, men, women, and children, on the 13th day of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The city of Susa was thrown into confusion, but Haman and the king sat down to drink, seemingly indifferent to the fate of an entire people. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes in mourning, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. In every province, as the news of the decree spread, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and lamentation. Esther's maids and eunuchs came to her and informed her of Mordecai's distress. Deeply troubled, Esther sent clothes for Mordecai to wear, but he refused them. Instead, he sent a message to Esther explaining the decree and urging her to go to the king to plead for her people. Esther was hesitant, for it was well known that anyone who approached the king without being summoned would be put to death unless the king extended his golden scepter. She sent word to Mordecai explaining the danger, but Mordecai's response was resolute. He reminded her that she would not escape the decree, even in the palace. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Inspired by Mordecai's words, Esther asked him to gather all the Jews in Susa to fast with her for 3 days, night and day. She and her maids would do the same. She resolved to approach the king, saying,
"When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish."
On the 3rd day, Esther donned her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, directly in front of the king's hall. When King Xerxes saw her, he was pleased and extended his golden scepter to her, sparing her life. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The king asked her,
"What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given to you."
Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. During the banquet, the king asked her again for her request, but Esther simply invited them to another banquet the next day, where she promised to reveal her petition. After the banquet, Haman left the palace in high spirits. But his joy quickly turned to anger when he saw Mordecai at the gate, still refusing to bow. Filled with rage, Haman went home and boasted to his wife Zeresh and his friends about his wealth, his many sons, and his rise in status. But he admitted that none of this brought him satisfaction as long as Mordecai the Jew sat at the king's gate. His wife and friends suggested that he build a gallows 75 feet high and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Delighted by this plan, Haman ordered the gallows to be constructed. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the Book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be read to him. As the Chronicles were read, he was reminded of the incident in which Mordecai had saved his life by exposing the assassination plot of Bigthana and Teresh. The king asked, "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." At that moment, Haman entered the court to request Mordecai's execution. Before he could speak, the king asked, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman, thinking the king meant to honor him, suggested that the honored man should wear a royal robe. Haman, assuming the king was speaking of him, suggested that the honored man should be dressed in a royal robe the king himself had worn, placed on a horse the king had ridden and adorned with a royal crest on his head. Then one of the king's most noble princes should lead this man through the streets, proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." To Haman's utter shock and horror, the king said, "Go at once! Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." Haman was forced to lead Mordecai, his most despised enemy, through the streets of Susa, dressed in royal robes and seated on the king's horse, while proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." The sight filled Haman with humiliation and rage, but he could do nothing. When the parade was over, Haman rushed home, covering his face in shame. He recounted the day's events to his wife, Zeresh, and his friends, who ominously warned him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish descent, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." As they were still speaking, the king's eunuchs arrived to escort Haman to the second banquet that Queen Esther had prepared. During this second banquet, King Xerxes asked Esther once more, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther, after careful fasting and prayer, finally revealed her true identity and the danger her people faced. She said, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king, shocked and enraged, asked,
Who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing?
Esther pointed across the table to Haman and declared,
An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman.
At that moment, Haman's confidence turned to terror. The king, furious, stormed out into the palace garden to collect his thoughts. Haman stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. As he fell on the couch where she was reclining, the king returned and, seeing Haman in such a position, exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen while she is with me in the house?" Immediately, the king's attendants covered Haman's face, signifying his impending doom. Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, spoke up, saying, "A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." King Xerxes commanded, "Impale him on it!" So Haman was executed on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. With that, the king's anger subsided, and the life of Haman, who sought to destroy the Jewish people, came to a fitting end. The same day, King Xerxes awarded Queen Esther the estate of Haman, his vast wealth, and all that he owned. Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told him of their family relationship. In a gesture of immense honor, the king took off his signet ring, previously given to Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, thus granting him authority and power second only to the king. But Esther knew her work was not yet complete. Though Haman was dead, the decree he had sent across the empire still stood. According to Persian law, once a decree was sealed with the king's ring, it could not be revoked. This meant that, even though Haman was gone, the Jewish people were still in mortal danger on the 13th day of Adar, the day set for their annihilation. Esther once again approached the king, falling at his feet, weeping and pleading for her people. King Xerxes extended the golden scepter, allowing her to speak freely. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor and thinks it is the right thing to do, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman devised, and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" King Xerxes replied,
Because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked.
Immediately, the royal secretaries were summoned, and Mordecai dictated a new decree. This new decree gave the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. They were authorized to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force that might attack them, along with their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day set for this defense was the same day that Haman's decree had appointed, the 13th day of Adar. The decree was written in every language of the empire and sent to every province and people. It was distributed swiftly by royal couriers on horses bred for speed. As the news spread, the Jews throughout the empire rejoiced. A wave of hope and relief swept over them, for they now had the means to defend themselves against their enemies. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was dressed in royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. The city of Susa erupted in celebration, for Mordecai's rise to power was a sign of favor for the Jewish people. Throughout the empire, the Jews held feasts and celebrations, and many people of other nationalities joined them, as the fear of the Jews and the power of their God had spread far and wide. On the 13th day of Adar, the appointed day arrived. The Jews assembled in their cities across the empire and prepared to defend themselves. Their enemies had hoped to overpower them, but the tables were turned, and the Jews triumphed over their adversaries. In the citadel of Susa alone, they killed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman, but they took none of the plunder. Across the provinces, 75,000 of their enemies were defeated, yet the Jews refrained from taking their possessions, seeking only the right to defend their lives. When the king heard the report of what had happened in Susa, he asked Queen Esther,
The Jews have killed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted.
If it pleases the king, give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles.
The king granted her request, and the bodies of Haman's sons were displayed as a sign of justice and a warning to any who might seek harm against the Jewish people. The following day, the Jews in Susa gathered again and killed 300 more men, but took no plunder. Across the empire, Jews celebrated with feasting and joy, for they had gained relief from their enemies. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, encouraging them to celebrate annually on the 14th and 15th days of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies. This celebration came to be known as the Feast of Purim, named after the pur, or lot, that Haman had cast to decide the day of their destruction. The Jews agreed to continue this observance for themselves and their descendants, a joyful celebration of feasting and giving gifts to one another and to the poor. King Xerxes continued to reign with power, and Mordecai the Jew rose to a position second only to the king himself. He was held in high esteem by his fellow Jews and worked tirelessly for the good of his people, speaking up for their welfare throughout the empire. The story of Esther teaches us the power of faith, courage, and divine providence. Esther's bravery and selflessness in the face of grave danger not only saved her people, but left a lasting legacy of hope and deliverance. Her story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we may be positioned for a purpose greater than ourselves. Like Esther, we may be called to act, to stand for justice, and to believe that even a single act of courage can change the course of history.